I'm Kim, and in this tutorial we are going to make a pinwheel block, and I am going to show you exactly how I get the points matching in the middle with my very secret hack, and I do not want you to tell anybody. This is our secret, all right? So let's get on and have a look at the fabric that we need to make this block and get this stitched up. And I'm doing this real time so that you can stitch this along with me if you want to. So let's get on to the fabric. So to make your pinwheel then, you're going to need your two fabrics. I've got a dark and a light. So for a standalone pinwheel block, it works really well as a strong contrast between a dark fabric and a light fabric. So I've got my squares ready here, and they are cut in my instance to 4 7/8 of an inch. So when we're creating our half square triangles, which we need to do for a pinwheel, you need to add 7/8 of an inch to your finished size. And if you check just above there, I'll put a link to a video I did on creating half square triangles. And then if you look down there, I'll put the link as well so you don't miss it. And I will pop it on the end because I love you and I'm very kind to you. So we're going to need 2 squares of each. So these are cut to 4 7/8 of an inch each. So I've got 2 of my greens and 2 of my whites. I've got some thread to match. That's not so important. You can use a neutral thread like a dark grey or a light grey, just depending on what colours you choose. But I've got a nice green thread there to match, and I've got a ruler and a pencil. Any old ruler and any old pencil will do. I would say though that get a sort of bluntish pencil. I am a lover of sharp pencils. If you look at my desk, it is full of very, very sharp pencils. However, sharp pencils don't write on fabric, and that's what we need to do. So a blunt pencil is where we need to be. So the first things first is what we are going to do is we're going to place our 2 sets of squares, flip them over, right sides together. Very simple. And we only need 2 sets because we're going to get 4 of our half square triangle blocks out of these 2. Okay. And then I'm going to draw a line diagonally from diagonal corner there to diagonal corner down there. That's all I'm going to do is draw a pencil line down the middle, and I'm going to do that on both of my squares. I would probably draw on the lighter side, the lighter of your 2 fabrics. And we're going to go from diagonal to diagonal. Don't worry too much if your fabric squares are not exactly lined up here, because we'll straighten them up when we get to the sewing machine. So that's your drawing done, so you can put your ruler and your pencil away. And we're going to move over to the machine. So I'm just going to pause this for 1 second whilst I get the machine. All right, we're at our machine now, and what I've done is I've straightened up the 4 edges of my 2 squares. So they're still right sides together, but I've just made sure that all the squares are nice and neat and tidy and lined up. I've set my machine to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam, and I've actually dropped my stitch length to a 2.0. That just gives us a tighter, neater seam, particularly as we're going across the bias. So what I'm going to do is use this pencil line, which you may not be able to see with the light, but there's the pencil line. I'm going to use that like I would the edge of my fabric, or the raw edge of my fabric. So normally we would put the edge of our fabric against the edge of our foot if we're stitching our 1/4 inch. But in this instance, I'm going to put that pencil line against the edge of my foot. So I'm going to start stitching right at the top. You need to be careful because we're coming in from a point, so you just need to be careful that your machine doesn't go all snarly, because it doesn't like stitching right on the edge. If it is going to be a problem, put a little stitch saver, thread saver at the end where you got a little bit of fabric. Stitch on that first and then come straight down onto your squares here. So I'm going to drop my needle. That sounded a bit dramatic, didn't it? And I'm going to simply stitch down with 1/4 inch using this pencil line as the edge of my fabric. That's all I'm doing. When I've got to the other end, okay, so there's the stitch line, there is the pencil line, and I'm going to switch it round and sew from the other direction. So from the top again, same thing, no different. I've got that pencil line nicely lined up against the edge of my foot, all the way to the bottom. Okay, and I'm going to do exactly the same on the other pair of squares that we did. So from the top. You don't actually need to pin this. The little pieces of fabric are too small really to move anywhere. So they won't come adrift. Let's get that into position. And down the other side. Okay. So we've now got our two pairs of squares. So we've got our dark on one side, a light on the other, and we've stitched them 1/4 inch either side of our pencil line like that. Okay, so next job, I'm going to move the sewing machine out of the way. Sewing machine away then. And then what I'm going to do is cut down that centre line. So from diagonal corner to diagonal corner, in between those two stitch lines. Make sure you are going exactly from corner to corner. So I have some triangles. And then same again on the other set. So from corner to corner. Put my ruler away. And then the next thing I'm going to do is press these open. And I'm going to press them to the dark side. So I have got, you are going to be very impressed. You might even be a little bit jealous, but I have got a homemade ironing pad here. So all I've done, never ever ever use just a towel on top of your cutting mat if you're just going to do a little bit of pressing. What I've got is a towel here. It's folded into 4, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of thermal wadding underneath there that are just left over from stuff I've been making. And if I do that amount, the heat won't get through to my cutting mat. So what I'm going to do is press these open. So get my little iron. So this is the little Prim travel iron, which I love for all my piecing ironing. And I'm going to press it to the dark side. And yes, if you can hear steam, I like using steam with a steam iron with my patchwork. I know there are quilt police out there, and I know there are hard and fast people who will only use a dry iron. I will say that if you use a steam iron on cheap fabric, I don't mean fabric that's in a sale, but if you buy sort of cheap, nasty-ish fabric, it's fine to practice on. But you'll find that if you put it under a steam iron, even a hot iron, it shrinks quite dramatically. So it's the kind of thing to use for kids to play with, just for practicing stitches, for making Christmas decorations, Easter decorations, that kind of thing. But for your quality work, you need a quality fabric, and I have never ever found a problem putting quality fabric under a steam iron. So I use a steam iron and I get a crisper finish. So I'm very sorry if you're part of the quilt police, but I use a steam iron. I think it is up to you. I want to enjoy my patchwork and my quilting, so I do what I love to do. Never had a problem, don't see a need to change. So I've done that one. Let's just do the others as well. So if you're doing this along with me. So what I've done, if you want a sort of close-up version, I've got my triangle with the dark side facing up. I'm then opening it, making sure the seam is facing away from me, and then I'm going to push with my iron. I'm not ironing like I do clothes, I'm actually pressing that seam away from me to give myself a nice crisp finish. Then I'm turning it over, and can you see how that's gone a bit weird and wonky here? You always need to press both sides. I was pressing it the wrong side. That's just to make sure you're awake, because I obviously wasn't, and I need a coffee. I'm going to get one in a minute. So I am pressing that to the dark side. I'm just checking I did do the other one to the dark side, which I did. Okay. Of course, having pressed it by mistake one side, it then doesn't want to go the other side. I'm just showing you that us teachers get it wrong sometimes too. Life isn't perfect, you know. So let's try and do this one a bit better. Okay, so quick press of that to the dark side. Flip it over. Okay, that's that one. I took a bit quicker. And then the final one. Okay. Flip it over. Just make sure all my seams are going to the dark side. So let's get that iron safely out of the way. So I have got 4 squares here. So let's get the layout of these squares. What we're trying to do is alternate the colours, but also get the diagonals going into the middle. So if I start with 1, so I've got my diagonal there going into the middle here, and then I get the next one, so I've got my alternate colours here, but the diagonal is going into the middle, and then the next one here. So if I held it here, that the dark is the next colour, but the diagonal is going the other way, so I want to make sure that a diagonal is going into the middle. And then last but not least, you can see here that diagonal is going towards the middle, but I need to alternate the colours. Can you see that? So it's very easy to get this wrong. So like that one, you'd say, oh, the diagonal's in the middle there, that's all fine and dandy, but we need to make sure that we're alternating the colours. So I'm going to turn that round. So I have got my 4 half square triangles with all the diagonals going into the middle and alternating colours as well. All right, so we're now going to stitch those together. So let's go back to the machine. Okay, so at the machine, this is the top 2 triangles, and if you can see just down here, I've got the other 2 triangles ready to go, the half square triangles ready to go. So what I'm simply going to do is, you really need to make sure that you keep this layout next to your machine, because it's very easy to get them all mixed up and turned around. So I'm very simply going to make sure that these are the right way around and flip the right hand one on top of the left hand one. And I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam down that right hand fold. So that would be sort of the middle section. So let me just do that again to show you. Okay, so that's in position. The diagonals are going towards the middle. I'm flipping the right one on top of the left one. So the right sides together. Don't worry about these ears here, and do not cut them off. I really want to make sure that my edges are lining up nicely. And then same thing again, I'm stitching with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm just making sure that all my edges, so a little bit of preparation really pays you dividends later on. Okay, so 1/4 inch seam down here. I haven't adjusted my stitch length, it's still at 2 by the way. Okay. So that's my first half stitched up. You definitely want this thing to be going on down at the bottom. So can you see there's a sharp point there, but there's a bit of extra, which is a 1/4 inch. when we stitch the two halves together, that disappears into the seam allowance. So I'm going to put that to one side. Here's my bottom two that are in position. This time the diagonals are going towards the center. Make sure that they're the right way. Again, flipping the right one over on top of the left one. Getting the edges all lined up. If you're turning it around like I am to straighten out the edges, be very aware that you know which is the side that you're stitching, because it's quite easy to turn it around and then you don't know where you are. And if you do that, I promise you're not alone. Okay. So that's that one. Just make sure that my edges are lined up, and then I am ready to rock and roll and stitch down that right hand seam. Oops. So there we go. So there's the bottom half. Now we have to stitch those two halves together. So let's move the camera out of the way and I'll show you how to put those together, but we do need to press them first. All right, so I'm back with my very natty ironing board here. I know you're jealous. I know you want one. So we need to press these seams, but the seams need to go in opposite directions. Let's get it all into camera. So I am going to press towards the darker triangle. So let's get my iron. And same thing again here. I'm pressing towards the dark side. So I'm on the wrong side and I'm actually going to push this over this time. So I'm starting on the wrong side just because I've got a lot of seams going on here. Flip it over and I can, what I'm doing is I'm giving this a little tug at the same time as I'm pushing with my iron. Okay, so that's the bottom half, and then I'll do the same with the top half here. So can you see it's very easy? The seam wants to go over to the white, but I need to push it over to the dark, particularly as I've been using a really light fabric. This is a white fabric with a little circular design printed on it, but it's any dark fabric will show through that. So I really want to push my seam over to the dark. So we'll do that again. Just make sure it's all flat at the top here where all these seams match. Flip it over. And I'm giving this a tug and I'm pressing into that seam. So I'm not just ironing over it, I'm really pressing into that seam to get the maximum out of that seam. So there we go, that one's good to go. So now let's move my iron out of the way. Make sure that those are matched together. So before we start putting it together, let me just adjust my camera so that you can see properly. So you can see this pinwheel is starting to take shape, and this is the bit that most people start quailing at, because we've got to make sure all these points match. So first things first, you want to make sure that you do actually have your design, that all the diagonals are going into the center, you haven't made any stitching errors, and you have got this alternate color design going on, because otherwise it won't be a pinwheel. Then I'm going to flip that over for the top half, flipping over to the bottom half. Now I've got to match up this point here. So if you look at the back of here, you can see where you've got this sort of triangle effect going on the stitching. Where the apex of that triangle is, that is where your point is on the other side, and on the other half is the same thing. So we want to get pins in here to make sure these are all matched up. So if I'm looking at this area that I'm matching, I am looking at this little section here. So I'm trying to get it in camera so you can see. So I am making sure that these two seams are lining up exactly. So again, a little bit of preparation and a little bit of time here. I am nesting my seams. So these seams need to butt up against each other absolutely exactly and absolutely perfectly. And if I roll it up I also want to make sure that that point at the top matches up, which it should do if you're been running an accurate 1/4 inch seam. Okay, and if I've got it into position, what I can do is stick a nail on that point there and flip it open and just see whether you've got it in about the right position there, which it kind of looks like I have once I've stitched it and pinned it. Okay, so let me do that again. Let me do it on the table, and I don't think I can zoom in anymore. Let's see if I can put the camera down. There we go. So I'm making sure that these two edges, these two seams are butting up exactly, and I'm going to roll it up so the raw edges are matched up neatly, and that should get all my points matched up as well. So I'm trying to see through a camera, which is quite an interesting proposition. If you subscribe, thank you. But if you follow me for a while, you know that my camera gets in the way quite a lot, really. I kind of need a see-through camera. And if you think, well, I could actually look at the screen on the back of my camera, which I can do, but it's quite difficult to watch that and pin. So I'm putting a pin in exactly on that seam there. Can you see? I've actually got the point of the pin coming up through the point on the other side. I'm going to flip it over and see where it's coming through. So can you see that pin gives me a little guide as to where it thinks it's going to match up, and it's not on that stitch line on the other side. And if I sew those together now, that'll be out. So I'm going to fiddle just for a moment, and I'll make no apologies for showing this on camera. I know it's probably a bit boring to watch, but this is important because if you want your pinwheels to match perfectly in the middle, this is the bit that you need to spend a little time doing, is to make sure that all your seams match up, your point match up, you've got your points on this stitch line matching up both sides. So can you see now I flipped it over, and that's far more accurate. Can you see this pin is coming through this stitch line and out at the point? And I haven't done anything magic. This is why I like to show all my students, whether you're subscribing on here or you're one of my students in my courses, I like to show you when it doesn't go quite so well, because stitching isn't always perfect, it always goes a little bit awry. It doesn't matter how long you've been stitching for, sometimes it just goes a little bit wonky. And here we are dealing with lots of pieces of fabric, but it's on the bias as well, so it will move around. Okay, so if I'm happy with the position of that, it still might not be perfect, mind. I'm going to stick a pin in either side. I like to do this because it really helps secure my seam when I'm stitching. I'm all in for pins on difficult seams. So there we go, I've got 3 pins in there, and now I'm going to show you my little hack for getting those seams accurate. So let's get the machine back. All right, at the machine, I've got my pinned seam here, and this time I'm going to put my stitch length up to maximum, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So I've actually got a 5mm stitch length, that's 5.0. You can go up to the maximum that you've got on your machine, and I'll tell you why. This is my little hack. Don't tell anybody that I'm telling you this, because this is my secret hack, but you will love me forever for this. This is how you do all your seams. If you need to match seams, this is how you do them. So I'm going to make sure that my edges are matching. I've got my pins in, and I'm going to stitch very close to the edge of my fabric. Okay, now when this crosses the stitch line, I know it's a bit difficult to see, I can't zoom in any further, but when the needle crosses, it needs to cross exactly on that apex of the seams. Remember this bit here at the top where that apex is, that's where your needle needs to cross. So I'm going to do this with my very long stitch length, and I'm only sewing about there, about an inch, inch and a half possibly, but it's not very far. And I'm going to go very slowly over these pins. So I'm going to put my needle down, I'm going to put it to slow on my machine. I'm still on 1/4 of an inch, but I am going to go slowly. And I'm making sure that as I go slowly, I'm going over that apex of that stitch line. And I'm literally only sewing about 1 inch. And the reason for it is that 5 stitch lengths of 5.0 or 5mm is a really good basting stitch length or tacking. So if you didn't know, you can use your machine to tack with, and that's what you would use because it's very easy to whip out afterwards. So you can see here, I've got my little stitch line, which is the basting one I've just done. I'm going to check on the back to see. It looks like it's gone across. Get that thread out of the way. It looks like it's gone across the 2 sort of apexes of that stitch, those stitch lines. So if I think it's okay, I'm taking the pins out, and then we're going to do a little drum roll and a little magic wand if you want. I'm all up for wands. I'm all up for sparkles. Anything, just offer prayer to the stitching gods. We're going to open it up and we're going to see. Now, can you see here? We've got 3 here which are perfect, and we've got 1 that looks a bit dodge on this side. Okay, so I probably need to come in a little tiny bit. So if I shuffle this in my left hand, if I shuffle that in a little bit, you can see that I would start getting an exact match in the middle. But this is where the beauty of that basting stitch is. I am not going to unpick that basting stitch at all. What I am going to do is flip it back over, and I'm going to stitch again, same thing, that wide stitch length or that long stitch length, and I'm going to come in just slightly, because if you remember, I needed to go slightly to the left here. So let me get my needle positioned. So if I use my hand wheel, I can just see where my needle is going to land. And if I'm happy, I'm going to stitch again. I'm really close to that original stitch line. Okay. Oops. I forgot to cut it. There we go. So if I open it up, where are we? There we go. That's absolutely perfect now. So can you see, using that basting stitch and just using it to your advantage and adjusting the fabric, it saves unpicking loads, pinning loads. You do not want to stitch down the whole length for these little points to not match up and then have to unpick the whole lot. So that's my little hack, and I do that for all my seams, if I've been completely honest. Especially with these ones that are on the bias, as I said, because they're very difficult to get moved around. Let me just get that thread out of the way, because now if I'm happy with that line, and I know that line, that second line I did is my perfect line, I'm putting my stitch length back down to 2 again, and making sure that my edges are matched up, and I am simply going to stitch down. But this time you just want to make sure that you're stitching over that second line, because you know, oh, I'm on slow, I forgot I was on slow. You know that that second stitch line is your perfect point line. I don't know if that's a phrase, but we'll make it up, shall we? We'll have a perfect point line. Okay, so I'm making sure that I'm going exactly over that second line. Okay, just make sure my edges are matched up. Just adjust as I go. Okay, and then we are good to go. And that is my pinwheel. So let me just get the machine out of the way, and I'm going to give that a quick press. It doesn't matter which side we're pressing this time, so I would just press that where the seam wants to go. This time I am going to press from the right side again, because it will fall naturally. And I'll flip it over. and just give those seams a press. The other side. I know it's tempting, but I don't tend to cut these little ears off in the middle. They do provide a bit of structure. I do cut the twizzles off, or the twizzly thread bits, but I don't bother cutting the bulk. Okay, and there you go. Press all over, put my iron out away, and that is your pinwheel. So it depends on the design of your quilt whether you join lots of these up, in which case you've got lots to match up, or you might want to put the borders on that if you're going to make it into a sampler block. Entirely up to you. But this makes a finished size. I'll just show you with my ruler, so I keep knocking things. This gives a finished size of 8 inches finished size, but you'll see that it's 8.5 inches because by the time we stitch it together, it will come down to 8 inches there. All right. Little rule for quilt blocks, by the way, always measure in the middle. Don't measure on the edges. I know it's tempting, but you measure in the middle because it all goes a bit wobbly. So that's an 8.5 inch size here, and that will finish at 8 inches. All right, so hope that has helped you make your pinwheel blocks. Please let me know how you get on. Do leave a comment down below because I love to hear from my subscribers. Do hit the subscribe button. Do you know, I discovered that I think it's something like 86% of the people who watch my videos don't subscribe. Please subscribe because then you don't miss out on all the tutorials that I give. And for any of my subscribers, if you leave me a comment and want to have a tutorial, I will record one just for you. I'll add it to the list. All right, so please don't forget to like, subscribe, put up a comment before and share it with your quilting buddies as well. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.